Hello, namaskar, and welcome to episode number 26 of Understanding Consciousness podcast. I am Ratandeep Singh from Bonobo Collective. Karl Friston. His videos on YouTube explaining the free energy principle and the predictive coding are some of the most interesting videos I've come across. 15-minute long videos, really dense with information and a lot to unpack and a lot to understand from those videos. But the main thing, the one thing I got from it, which I didn't know about before, and I really understood that thing, um, is the earlier we is this is that the thing is this that earlier scientists used to think that brain works as stimulus response um, system. You give it a stimulus and you get a response. The world outside, if it changes in some way, the inner the inner mind reacts to the outside world by giving you the perception of the thing that um, um, is coming in from the outside, right? That's the general view of of the brain. That's how we think the brain is, right? There is something outside. The data is coming from the data are coming from the outside. Information is coming from the outside, and the brain responds to it and acts on it, which is fine. Which is a nice way to enter this field. But Carl Friston, who's not the only one who's saying this. A lot of people have. Helmholtz machine is the example that historically is the first one, where the model of the brain and the conscious perceptions is of a proactive system rather than a reactive system. brain our brain is constantly predicting the stimulus that it is going to receive from the outside world, and that is happening constantly. Like the in a lot of ways, our perception is a prediction of the outside. It's a I cannot explain too deeply because I don't really understand this very deeply. So I might make a mistake in explaining to you what it means, what I think it means. But if you consider the fact that I'm just a student, and let me riff on this idea, just I couch this my explanation in this bracket of me trying to riff on this idea from a student perspective. I have there is no guarantee that I'm going to be right. To me, this feels like the brain, the same thing that we understood before from one of the earlier podcasts about the the unconscious inference, right? The way optical illusions work is something that um, is um, um, is very crucial to understand here. Our brain is like a Bayesian engine, where there are some priors and some posteriors, right? There are the Bayesian system of statistics has these two different ideas. Priors are nothing but a prediction of what the probability of something happening is before the data come in, and posterior probabilities are something that is a result of the priors and the data that changed the priors accordingly. Right? There is some prediction, and the data from the world is taken in, and then the mind, sorry, not the mind, the brain changes the model according to the data to fit the data better, so that in the future the prediction is better. That's it. That's And from that point of view, it's a sudden shift in the way we perceive we think of consciousness and conscious perception. And conscious perception is mostly a prediction of the world outside. How does that relate to optical illusion? Again, couch this all in the fact that I am just a student, I don't know anything about what I'm talking about. Optical illusions are a failure of that prediction, shown very starkly to us in an instant. The mind thinks that there is something, and on closer inspection, it turns out to be something else. Something else. What is that accent? I don't know. Anyway, so that's what I understood from the videos of Karl Friston. I really need to spend more time on those videos, because I know that in the last episode of this podcast I had said that I would read the paper, but I realized that reading that paper is not, I'm not really ready for it, because it's so dense with ideas, and every line is a new idea, and there is mathematics as well. So helplessly I moved to YouTube and tried to find some videos of Carl Friston, and I am thankful that I did, because his way of explaining actually does help immensely. He talks about things like the Markov blanket, which is fascinating. I really don't really understand, and I cannot explain that. Just go read about Markov blanket. It's a blanket. It's like a membrane of an organism, where you can separate the insides of that membrane, as an inner state, and the outside of that as the environment. So we are like, our bodies are like the Markov blanket in some ways, and the brain, the sensations and the actions are the only two ways in which the inner and the outer world interact with each other. The outer to inner information comes through sensations, as subconscious also, but conscious as well, and the actions are the other way around. The actions affect the outside world, rather than the inner state. That's the two parts of the membrane, the flowing in and the flowing out. All right, that's the extent of my new learnings of the facts about and the other theories on the mind and the consciousness, and how the brain handles perception, and why are the things the way they are, according to science, the latest science. However, I realize that there is more to this podcast. There is a dimension of personal practice in trying to understand consciousness. I myself am aware of one consciousness, my own, absolutely aware. I have access to it. I have access to the sensations. I have access to the inner thoughts and emotions. And meditation and mindfulness is the path that I am trying to follow in order to understand consciousness from the inside. in order to see it for myself in the laboratories of my brain. And I've never shared this, I think, on the podcast, but this is my background of that point of view of my life. I started meditating about 5 years ago after reading Sam Harris's book called Waking Up. Check it out, beautiful book. Explains the idea of meditation to someone who is a skeptic, an atheist, one of those people who don't really um, believe in the supernatural, and those people who tend to throw the baby with the bathwater, so to speak, of spirituality, for a lack of a better term, along with all other religious ideas. Now, his book really encouraged me to go and um, um, sit in a 10-day retreat. I have done that 3 times over the years, 2014, 2016, 2018. However, I have not managed to fulfill the requirement of daily meditating 1 hour in the morning and 1 hour in the evening. I've tried to follow it a few times, but I fail miserably, sometimes going months without even sitting for 1 minute. But I do come back again and again, and I try to do it 10 minutes every day, and I try to do some moments of like walking meditation, or just while eating, just focus. Anyway, that's my background. um After that book, Sam Harris came up with an app of waking up, and that app has a lot of interesting meditation instructions. And the thing about meditation instructions is that the metaphors that people use, different people, different teachers, the metaphors that they use can be really interesting, and can be the switch that gives you the next insight about your mind. Things like there are a few interesting things that I remember now, and I wrote them on my book, in my notebook, and I'm gonna try to discuss them on this podcast right here, right now. The first very interesting idea, the what Sam Harris's basic view is, and of course that's the view of Buddhism, and I have made a video on that. You can check it out. It's one of my most cherished videos because the animation took 1 month, and it's anyway, it could be better. I have not really explained it nicely, but I've included a lot of ideas from William James and Buddhism and emptiness, and the idea of nothing is actually real. But that's the view about in Buddhism about the mind, the unity, not the unity, but the emptiness of mind, the non-duality, but we think that we are the self, and there is an environment, and the the in some ways it's like the Markov blanket, we feel is this real thing. But I'm not talking about that. Everything in the mind is something that comes into consciousness through something, right? I mean, we feel that our this table in front of me is the outside world, and the laptop in front of me and the mic in front of me right now is the outside world. And it is, of course, there is something real about that. It's the reality. But the visual of all those things right now, that is coming into my eyes, and my brain is making this perception of vision, that is my consciousness. That is the manifestation of conscious content. That's a very strange way of saying, not strange, but a convoluted way of saying that the whatever we experience is happening in the same space, right? And here is the first insight, the first metaphor that really helped me here. Whatever boundary we feel right now, we usually feel the boundary is our body and the face and I can see the outside and I cannot see the inside, and there is this skin I have that separates the inside and the outside. But if you look closely, all that feeling of the boundary is also a part of this conscious content. Whatever the boundary you feel has to be a part of the conscious content. So actual consciousness is boundaryless in a way. It cannot have a boundary, because the boundary can only manifest as a content of consciousness. It's a very for someone who's never been meditating, it's a strange idea, I understand, and I don't really think that I have authority on this subject at all to emphasize that. But um, I believe in knowing through direct experience, and I did kind of experience some insights of dissolution of the separateness between the subject and the object. That I have this subject riding in my head, and everything else is the object of my mind. The non-duality is that the subject and the object both are actually the conscious content. And there is this bigger context, this separate context of all that content, which is the deeper unity consciousness, that everything is a part of that, everything is a manifestation, everything is a, a characterization of the same stuff of, that's one insight. The other insight is, you can say, okay, you say non-duality, but then you talk about consciousness and the contents. How are now you're dividing it again, the context and the content. And this is where the second metaphor is very interesting. This comes from Joseph Goldstein. He says it's like the color and the shape of the color and shape. Just take an object, it has a color and it has a shape, but those two things cannot be separated. A color cannot exist without having a shape, and a shape cannot exist without having a color, right? And but those two are different things, and we can discuss them differently. Similarly with the context and the contents, the context and the content are interrelated. The context is manifested through the content, and there is something, you know what I'm saying? Maybe not, maybe I'm confusing myself and everyone. But thanks for listening to my ramblings of the inner side of this question. There are more insights to be had from daily meditation, and I hope to do that as well. And this has been a long podcast, but I'm glad that I went through the inner parts of this question of understanding consciousness. And I think that's one of the more interesting parts of it, even though I love the outside world and I love to understand the ideas that are coming up in the current scientific atmosphere. I want to also have the direct experience of the insights about my own consciousness, and that I think everyone should do, because that's how we I don't know why, how, but it's just interesting. Everything we do in life is through our minds, no? So thanks for listening. See you next time.